Good morning. My name is Tushti, and this is my husband, Surendra, and we're happy that you came this morning. The question posed in the reading was, by thinking, can one arrive at understanding? And actually, the answer came soon thereafter, and the key word was realize. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it, and your deathless self within. Now, this single statement can really answer all our questions, but the depth of it is infinite. And it can be challenging to hold on to or even grasp for a fleeting moment. Now, why is that? Well, as Claire read, the intellect alone can never lead one to truth. When we rely on the intellect, we're relying really on a very limited source. No, essentially what happens is we move around room to room to room to room within the confines of our own minds. Can you not just see Master standing back, very lovingly looking at us, thinking, how can the little cup hold the sea? Well, we all begin as truth seekers asking questions, don't we? What is this world all about? Why am I here? Sometimes it's get me out of here. But more important, who am I? Who is this I? You know, when I was a little girl, we didn't go to church as a family, but my father would take me to Sunday school and drop me off, and then after it was over, he'd come and pick me up. And I had many questions about Jesus, and I couldn't understand why they would crucify him when his message was one of love. Now, I didn't have my questions answered at that time, and partly because I didn't know perhaps how to pose the questions. And then we moved away, and for some reason that became sort of the end of my opportunities to go to Sunday school. And then I remember in the 5th or 6th grade, I think it was, on Fridays, the Catholic children got to leave and go to catechism. And I understood this to be Bible study, and I wanted to go with them. And I couldn't because I wasn't Catholic. So I proposed to my father that we might consider being Catholics. It was a very short conversation. He wasn't the least bit interested. And then when I was in my 20s, or late 20s, I guess it was, many religious organizations would send representatives out 2 by 2, and they would knock on your door. And I let them all in. I was looking for some answers. You know, the Jehovah's Witness, Seventh-day Adventists, Baptists, I let them all in. I listened to what they had to say. I repeated words as they asked me to. I got down on my knees. I did all of it, and yet I didn't feel anything. You know, I didn't feel anything really until I came to Ananda. And I'll never forget, this was up in Seattle, and I was driving actually home from work one day, and I looked in their old temple actually had more like a storefront. It was, you looked into their boutique, and people had gathered there, and I was as if I could feel their joy, and I thought, that's what I want. So I called the next day and signed us up for a meditation class. And so here we are. Ananda, look what happens. Ananda means joy, and it is a path of self-realization. It's the path of inner knowing. You know, these masters have come and given us the keys that open the windows of our minds to expand our consciousness beyond the intellect. It's their gift to us, you know. In our reading, as Claire was reading, you know, Jesus was speaking to the fact that the Pharisees had moved so far away from the inner truths and given too much importance to the lesser rules. There was no longer the love and devotion. And that's what Jesus was saying. It's purity of heart that is the most important. You know, when we have to open our hearts to God. And it's not how we wash or when we wash our hands. Jesus says to be still and go inside to the inner sanctuary. You know, it's in the temple of our hearts. It's through inner communion that the truths are revealed to us. Now, truth is the substance born of cosmic intelligence, so it's not in our minds already. It is deep inside. It's the connecting link behind all creation, and it's the thread of love that connects each of us. It just winds in and out of all of our hearts. And truth can only be perceived through our intuition. Intuition is the soul's power of knowing. It's deep inside, and intuition is developed through our meditation. And the masters have given us those keys. We have many, many opportunities to utilize our practices. We have the lives of the masters. They know the answers, and they have come again and again and again to show us the way home. Master promised that as long as there was one thirsty soul, he would return. We have Raja Yoga. Right now we have 26 students in that program. Raja Yoga is this path of self-realization, laying out for us simple guidelines to live our lives, and helps us to understand who we are, and the spectrum of who we are. It makes the journey so much easier and so much more joyful when we have that understanding. We have meditation techniques all the way to Kriya. We have energization exercises to help us feel the subtle energy that moves within us, that is of the divine. And we can recharge our bodies with cosmic conscious energy. It's all around. We just know how to tap into it. And dear to my heart and Connie's and many others is a brand new yoga and healing center opening. I think you've probably all seen it, a work in progress. We'll offer yoga classes, to prepare the body to be still, and healing classes to awaken the body's innate wisdom to heal itself. It's all inside. Utilizing prayer and affirmations. Affirmations are really, they'll expand our consciousness, and they're planting seeds of truth and reassurance. There's one, and it's very poignant right now in these sort of challenging times. It's the affirmation for Garudasana, eagle pose. At the center of life's storms, I stand serene. I love it. At the center of life's storms, I stand serene. Now, my brother Ron and Surendra's sister Susie recently lost their jobs. And I really wish that they had Ananda as their foundation, because where else can you go that affirms the divinity within you and gives you a sense of inner strength and peace? We've been blessed with so many teachings, and we have, of course, Master's music. The choir was angelic. And music bypasses the mind, and it goes just straight for the heart. Deepening our devotion to God, and that's the journey, opening our hearts. We have to allow it to come into us. We have, there was another point that just went through. Oh, yes. We have Swamiji, how could I forget that, as a living example of what it looks like to devote yourself to God and Guru. He created Ananda, and we have to just thank every day for his devotion, because it's because of his devotion that we have Ananda and that we are right here. In our sadhaka group, we're studying right now Gyanamata and reading her book, God Alone. And if you haven't read it, I encourage you to do so. Her name means, Gyanamata means mother of wisdom. And I would add to that love and devotion, because she's like Swamiji. She's devoted her whole life to Master. And it's very inspirational, especially when you're trying to find your way. She writes letters to different devotees, so you might want to pick it up and read it. when we attune ourselves with the masters, we move closer to God, and our hearts open, and we begin to let go of the little ego and the little mind. And I say begin because it's not an easy task. Sometimes we take our souls sort of take this role of human being as being very important. And we get tied up or just so involved in this grand Leela. Perhaps we sort of let go of some of our practices. But we just have to always come back. I'll mention the Festival of Light. I love it. It's the story of this little bird who represents our egos and our minds, and it's the journey of our souls. Each week we hear, your strength to fly has never been your own. Look to the source of all power if you would conquer fear and weakness. And the little bird asks, where can I find this source? Seek it in the farthest depths of being, in your own self. In your own self. All we need to do is to surrender into the arms of the divine. Because God watches our hearts, not our minds. And He only asks of us is for our love. God bless.
It's interesting that this topic this morning has fallen in part to me because before I came to Ananda, at the age of 53, I had a long history of valuing the intellectual progress as, above all, the way to learn. And I have since been redirected, I'm happy to say. But I thought, therefore, I was. And what I was plainly unaware of the extent to which I was deluded. Now, as an avid thinker, as you might imagine, I had really little or no interest in meditation and little, if any, appreciation for whatever it was that meditation was supposed to accomplish. I had an active mind, and the idea of switching it off or trying to switch it off just struck me as unproductive. My allegiance was to reason, and reason advised me to learn as much as I could about people and things and life, and then apply that to my own world of wants and needs. Now, in my defense, I should add that I was on the whole modestly successful and mostly happy. I even managed to win the heart and hand of the lady on my left here, a blessing which has changed my life in many wonderful ways, albeit sometimes grudgingly at first. It was Tushti who was instrumental in my coming to Ananda, and thus to face the many challenges of a more deeply inward experience, a more deeply inward environment. And for me, the battle continues. My heart and my head still wrestle for control, and my head wins much of the time. Perhaps because it prefers the structural tidiness that logical thinking sometimes produces. Well, in view of all of that, and in particular in view of our reading this morning about Jesus and the Pharisees, I couldn't help but think, where would I have stood on the matter of Jewish law versus the higher principles that Jesus proclaimed? Would I have been a Pharisee, arguing for the strict application of the latest theological do's and don'ts? Or would I have seen through that, seen the pettiness, and opposed them? It's easy to look from hindsight and criticize the Pharisees as Jesus does in this reading. But for me, it raises a much more important contemporary question, which is, what are the petty rules and laws today that I am reluctant to abandon? And that is to say, where is my ego holding fast to a habit or desire that is interfering with my spiritual progress? And where is my thinking at odds with my ability to reach a higher state of understanding, forgiveness, compassion, or generosity? This is the question in today's reading that each of us needs to answer. Where am I still a Pharisee, adhering to certain social positions to the detriment of my higher potential? James Barrie, who gave us Peter Pan, said, "Life is a long lesson in humility." And what makes it a long lesson is sometimes our ignorance, but more often, I suspect, it's because we are loath to let go of thinking that things are supposed to be the way we prefer them to be, people in particular. We develop rules of engagement, don't we? And as a result, loving begins to acquire conditions. We take, for example, as Pharisees or like Pharisees, a teaching on love, and little by little we add conditions to it until love begins to acquire dependent clauses. Whether or not I love you is really not so much about you, it's more about me and the extent to which I think that you may be like me. It really doesn't work very well that way, but that's certainly the way we try to a great extent, isn't it? Well, this is a practice which is called judgment. And we exercise it relentlessly, don't we? Yet we can change with just the simplest shift, just the smallest commitment, not to react to unexpected results when the unexpected occurs, not to react when someone pushes our emotional buttons. A wise person once said that life is 10% what happens to us and 90% how we respond to it. Do you want to be happy? It's something that Tushti referred to just a little bit earlier. Take a tip from Sister Gyanamata. Her prayer and her dedication was to a single ideal. Lord, change no circumstance of my life. Change me. That's really what is required of us. That is what works. You know, the great ones have assured us that enlightenment is our destiny. Indeed, it is our birthright. We are sparks of the divine, made in God's image. And because God is fully enlightened, we have that capacity born right into us. So how in the world did things get so messed up? How did we get led so far astray from that which has always been ours to claim, that freedom that has always been ours to claim. Ah, yes, the ego, that blasted monkey wrench in the whole arrangement. Well, here's what's interesting about that. And here's what explains, I think, why the ego is so intent upon taking the reins and running us all over the map. My ego may do precisely that, and I may allow it to continue for a long time, for lifetimes. But my ego cannot take credit for my enlightenment, my liberation, my communion with God when I finally attain it. These ideals are already in existence. They existed in me and in you the moment that our souls came into being. It's really what we need to remember and what we need to pursue is the whole concept of reaching out, as Tushti said, for that devotion that brings us to the point of realizing that the ego cannot take credit for that enlightenment, that liberation, that everlasting, eternal reward. All it can really do is delay the process. Granted, I may allow my ego to continue to take the lead for a long time, but at some point, I'm going to wake up and realize that that is just not the way. Mark Twain had an observation about himself that speaks somewhat to my own experience. He said, "Some people are bothered by passages in the scriptures that they do not understand. The ones that bother me are the ones that I do understand." Well, I do understand the foolishness of the Pharisees in regarding the Old Testament so narrowly, mainly just to further their own authority. And what bothers me is the extent to which I allow that to affect my own thinking. How often I gravitate to that very same way of looking at the world. Ever caught yourself in that position too? Probably not more than a dozen times a day if you're anything like me. It's that judgment thing. Remember the old TV game show, Truth or Consequences? Well, that's what our lives are all about. We can play the game to win by following the lead of the blissful ones before us, the saints, the masters, our own living friend and guide, Swami Kriyananda. Or we can play it to suffer. As Vince Lombardi said, winning is a habit, but so is losing. The choice is entirely ours. But if we will remember what is innate to us, that God has become us, we are His children, and all we have to do is remember to act accordingly. God bless.